And the serpent goes to her and starts talking to her. And again, she's by herself. What does that mean? It means that the serpents in your life are going to come to you when you're by yourself, when you feel most alone, when you're most vulnerable. It means something. The serpents, no matter how well you try to protect yourself in life, the serpents will always get into the garden. No matter how perfect you think you created things, no matter how protective you created things, the serpents will still get into your garden. They were created for something greater, and they rejected their greater calling and accepted to be just like everybody else. That means something. Some of you in here maybe have a magnificent calling, and yet will settle for being like everybody else because we just won't step forward on faith. It doesn't have to be a religious faith. There's still a lesson there that you can step forward on faith and be greater than what you otherwise would have been if you just went back and resided and was like everybody else. So many of us just settle for being like everybody else when you could be something greater, the knowledge of good and evil. So when she ate of that fruit, she became like God in that one little tiny, almost insignificant way. She knew good from evil. In the most self-destructive way, she knew that was true. Now, what was probably going on in her mind? You mean I'll become powerful and be able to create universes? Let's find out. Try it. So the one thing that actually catches her up is the one thing that is true, but it's still a manipulation. A lot of death. This is why I know so many old people who are dead, Just talking to them, you can see it. And there's a life that's just full of absolute regret and guilt. I'm sure some of you are absolutely racked by guilt of something that you've done in your life. And I know that some of you couldn't give less of a shit, even though you've done some horrible things in your life. Both of those are damaging, because both of those stop us from becoming better, which is what we were talking about earlier. Adam and Eve can't go back to what they were, but they can become better than what they presently are. I guess what I'm saying is that there's two paths that all of us can choose, life or death. Which one are you going to choose? So we can be absolutely certain only about the things that we do not understand. So how is it, what would be an example of a political doctrine that we don't fully understand? Democracy. Okay. Now, what do we not understand about democracy, maybe?
That it doesn't work.
Yeah, but why doesn't it work?
Because the people do not know, the audience and the people do not know what they want, and the audience is bullshit.
It's a true story. Now, how is it that we don't fully understand? Well, why is it so powerful? Well, because we typically believe in it, even though we don't really understand it. And if we truly understood it, we would see that there are lots of problems with it. So, for example, one of the problems with democracy is that everybody gets a vote. But that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you have any kind of specialization. It doesn't matter if you're even particularly well informed. Like if somebody who, let's say that they watch the news, let's say 12 hours a day, and they watch news from all kinds of perspectives from all across the world. And so let's say that they are especially well informed. Their vote counts just as much as somebody who, has never read a newspaper in their life. And so we start to see all kinds of problems with democracy if we really look at it. And so now we can come along and say, well, if not democracy, I don't know, maybe communism. Well, people will oftentimes say things like, well, communism sounds really good in theory, but when you apply it, it hasn't been done right just yet. That's a really frightening idea from some people. I don't know how many, as we've said before, I don't know how many bodies have to pile up before we finally say, maybe it's the system that's problematic. But in any event, if you don't know about the problems of communism, you can get hung up on the idea that, well, it seems like a good idea, and that's why we're absolutely certain about it, because we don't recognize the problems with our doctrines. It doesn't really matter which doctrine you have, whether it's religious or scientific or political, there are problems with your doctrine. And the only way that you can be 100% certain that your way is the right way, or is the only way, is if you don't really know too much about it. Like, for example, if you're religious, let's say you're religious. Let me make sure I understand what you're saying. You believe that there's some like sky ghost somewhere who made all of this and loves you and cares deeply about you while he lets babies die. Do I understand you correctly? Yeah. Well, that seems like it. If you look at, let's say that you're a Christian, you're a Jew, and you look at Genesis 1 and you say, I'm gonna become informed. I'm gonna read these things and understand it. Well, if you even start from the very beginning of the book, the first 2 chapters of the book, not even the first 2 books, the first 2 chapters of the first book, it tells you that how the universe was created, and then it gives you a completely contradictory version of how the universe was created. Chapters 1 and 2, they're 2 completely different stories of creation. How does that work? But you believe it? Okay. All right. Those of you who are atheists, let me make sure I understand your position properly. You believe that in the beginning there was nothing, and then it exploded. And then fast forward 12.5 billion years, and here we are talking about it. You really believe that, huh? Okay. You see the issue. If you're religious, you have to recognize that there are problems with your doctrines. Now, that doesn't mean that the problems are insurmountable, that they're complete contradictions, so therefore it's not true. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that you can only be 100% certain of this thing if you don't really understand it. Because if you really understood it, you would see the problems in it. If you're an atheist, again, you'd have to, if you really understood your position, you'd have to recognize there are problems with it. And you can only be 100% certain of this thing if you don't recognize the problems in it. In other words, if you only see the good stuff about it, or the stuff that makes you feel better about yourself. I don't know, what's another political doctrine? Transgenderism. I got your attention, huh? What's he going to say? So let me understand this correctly. If I get your position, you can let me know if I'm wrong. You believe that men can have periods. You believe that, huh? And you believe that, and you'll say that trans women are women too. And I guess in the same way that white chocolate is chocolate. We know it's not, but we just pretend it is. Do I have that right? Okay. I want to make sure. If you are against transgenderism, let me understand this correctly, if I got your position right. You believe that people just want attention, so therefore they're willing to go through very difficult surgeries and very difficult mental health crises just to get attention. You think it's just about that. You really believe that people torment themselves that way just for that. Okay. Hopefully you see what I'm talking about here. Whatever side of any of these positions you're on, you have to recognize that it's never just as simple as I have all of the answers and I have all of the truth. The only way you can be certain about any of these things is if you don't fully understand it. Because understanding brings a whole series of other questions along with it. And so what we miss oftentimes is that the thing that we're really looking for, oftentimes, by asking these kinds of questions, which religion is true or false? Are transgender people, are they having a mental breakdown, or is it a real thing? Democracy versus communism. All of these discussions have strengths and weaknesses. And now, here's the important thing. It's not to say, therefore, who knows, nobody knows anything, therefore we just walk away from it and we drop into a nihilist fit. It's not that either. What it means is that if these are things that we're willing to discuss, and by the way, if we're telling the truth, break up friendships and break up family dynamics and all that, if it's that important to us, then it should be more important enough for us to really understand. And the only way that we really understand is if we study it, if we think about it, if we apply deep thought to it. You'll notice that a lot of times these discussions end with us just saying, well, everyone's got their own opinion, as though none of this matters. Well, of course it matters. All of these religious, scientific, and political things matter. What happens to us after we die? How is it that we should live while we're here? And then scientifically, of course, we're seeking truth. What is it for something to be true. And truth is a very difficult concept to come up against. I was talking yesterday to one of my classes about the idea, wait, what's 2 plus 2? Yeah, it's not a trick question. What's 2 plus 2? It's 4, yes. Unless, of course, you're a graduate student at Harvard. If you're at Harvard, of course, it's very different. A graduate student last year, there's a, if you guys know about it, there's a, I don't know, controversy, I guess you might call it, where people were arguing that 2 plus 2 can equal 5 under very specific circumstances. But apparently, you must be a graduate student at Harvard to understand that this is the case. By the way, when everybody puts in their little bio that, at the beginning of an article they wrote, I'm a graduate student at Harvard, you know what they're trying to get across to you, right? I am therefore smarter than you. Whenever you meet someone from Harvard and they're trying to impress you, just remember, I was accepted to Harvard, all right? This jackass who's walking around San Diego with cowboy boots and has never been on a horse before. He was accepted to Harvard. So don't let that impress you too much. Just always think back and go, well, I guess he went, so it doesn't mean much. Now, what essentially he was arguing in order to make this work is he had to change the meaning of words, he had to change the concept of words, and essentially all that it amounted to was, well, there's no reason we have to call this 2. We could very well call this 3, and it would mean the same thing. That's all it was. It was just a language argument. So you ask yourself, why would someone go through all the effort to write a defense of this kind of a thing when it's really something really silly? I mean, isn't that kind of stuff that most of us think of like in 4th grade? That's a skateboard. But we could call it like basket, and then everyone would call it basket. So? It doesn't change the fact that it's the object that it is. It doesn't change the fact that the numerical quantity, or at least the numerical value of these objects, equals the same whether we call it 2 or 3. It doesn't matter what we call things. The concept is still there. So why is it that someone would say something like that? Well, it's because they're trying to muddy it. They're trying to confuse you. They want you to believe that there's no such thing as actual real truth. And now you have to wonder about why is it that a person who's supposed to be studying who is studying mathematics at Harvard, is going to try as best as they can to confuse you. Isn't the whole point of mathematics to clarify things? Isn't the whole point of religion, science, politics, culture, these lenses through which we see the world, aren't they designed to clarify the world for us? And yet a lot of people will use these things to try to confuse us. And you have to ask yourself that question, why is it that people want to confuse us and want to make it seem as though there's no such thing as actual truth? Well, probably because nothing probably matters as much as truth. I mean, truth is the one thing in the universe. Like, I love you guys. I gotta pay you guys. If you remember this. But if it's you against the truth, I'm gonna bet on the truth every single time, because the truth always wins out. There's nothing else in the universe that's more powerful than the truth. The truth is the very thing that sets you free. And if the truth is what sets you free, what is it that lies do? Yeah, they hold you hostage. They put you in bondage. You're no longer free. Now you become a servant of the lies. And you become a servant of your own lies. Either mentally, you know that what you're saying isn't true, but now you also have to kind of live your whole life covering up those lies. You can't live your life being free. And so if the truth is the one thing that sets us free, and if the lies are the things that put us in bondage, then it seems like the thing that we should be seeking above anything else is truth. It's the one thing that's guaranteed in the universe. The truth will always work out because we live in a universe that just doesn't care how we feel about it. Anybody in here not want to get hit by a big-ass asteroid? Yeah, I feel that way. I'd like to live a little longer. It'd be cool. It'd also be cool to be here when the whole thing goes down. But having said that, notice how the universe didn't take democracy into account here. It didn't show up me like, who wants to be hit by an asteroid? And we're like, no, we'd rather not. Okay, then it won't happen. No, the universe doesn't seem to care what we think about it. It just is. So I wonder why it is that people will come along and try to muddy the truth for us. And it starts to make sense after a while, because if you can control that, then you can control people. If you can control the language, then you can control people's perception of reality. And therefore, you're not necessarily controlling the truth at all. You're controlling people, how people think. But eventually the truth will win out. It always does. Yeah.
If truth sets you free, then let's just say, Immanuel Kant, right?
Mm-hmm. I met him, yeah. Good guy.
And
Sorry, he died like 300 years ago. Go ahead.
and if it's moral or correct to lie or and to be truthful, because to be truthful sometimes has some consequences of like death or like outrageous harm to someone.
Oh yeah.
Saying a lie.
Yeah. Yeah, there are consequences to telling the truth. You could die. You could get somebody else killed. You can get chastised. You can get people saying terrible things about you. You ever have people say things about you that just simply weren't true, and you just couldn't defend it because who's going to believe it? That's like Tuesday for me, man. But here's the thing: you're gonna pay a price for telling the truth. But here's the thing: you're also gonna pay a price for not telling the truth. You're gonna pay a price for everything that you do in life, and I mean that genuinely. I'm sitting over there and I was eating maple fudge. You ever had maple fudge before? Yeah, it's not even as good as it sounds. It doesn't even sound particularly good, does it? But here's the thing: I'm going to pay a price if I eat it. What price am I going to pay? I'm taking in calories. I'm taking in sugar. It's going to affect my health for sure. And if I don't eat it, I'm going to pay a price. I'm going to be hungry. I'm going to want sugar. I'm going to feel like I'm missing something. If you tell the truth, you may be persecuted. And if you lie, even if you aren't persecuted and you get away with it, you still have to live the fact that you're a liar. And you still have to live in that bondage. So I guess the question is, do you want to die free or do you want to live in bondage? And that's a real question, by the way. And oftentimes we just kind of knee-jerkedly will say, I'm going to live free. And we'll take the same pose I took earlier, chin up and looking off into the distance. What would you do today if people showed up here and grabbed you, threw you in chains, and went to enslave you? Many of us say, I would die fighting. Bullshit. Slavery is not the exception. Is not the exception in history. Slavery is the rule, man. Millions and millions and hundreds of millions of people have gone into slavery in the course of human history. That's what we do to each other. And how many of those people died fighting? Very few. Most people don't die fighting that. Most people just kind of go into it. So when we say things like, I would rather live free than die in bondage. No, maybe you're one of those people. And if you're one of those people, you can also realize it may get your family killed too. It may get other people around you injured as well. Is that a price that you're willing to pay? Because you're going to pay a price for telling the truth or for lying. The question is, which price do you want to pay? Oftentimes in life we think that the easiest price to pay is the one of lying. It won't bother me so much that I'm a liar. It won't really bother me so much that I have to live to cover that up. Maybe we're just used to it by now. Maybe. But we do eventually all end up paying for what it is that we do. Sooner for some, later for others. But we all end up paying a price, and that's the thing. You have to figure out, which price do I want to pay? Are you guys going to go to college or not? You're going to pay a price either way, either for going or not going. Are you guys going to get a job afterwards? You're going to pay a price either way, for getting a job or not getting a job. Hell, are you going to get into a relationship? If you get into a relationship, you're going to pay a price for it. And if you don't, you're going to pay a price for that as well. I guess the question is just, which prices do we want to pay? Yeah.
So you always tell the truth, not just answer it, but tell the truth.
Tell the truth. At the very least, don't lie. At the very least, stop lying. If you can bring yourself to stop lying, then hopefully you can develop the strength to then tell the truth. Yeah.
But I don't think the truth is necessary all the time. Like, not everything is necessary to be known. How do you know when it's best to not say anything at all?
One more time.
So you're saying speak the truth, right? But sometimes I would think that it's best to not say anything at all, whether it be truth or a lie. How do you know which circumstances are those?
I know this firsthand. I'll ask students, what the hell are you doing? Say nothing at all. And what ends up happening is I imagine most people in your life probably get annoyed and frustrated and lose patience, and they go, get out of here. I don't. I still continue to stare. This can go on for half an hour or 40 minutes. We're going to see who's dumber, me or you. I guess one of the rules is tell the truth when it's asked of you, of course. In other words, you don't want to go around and just be like, your hair is ugly, out of nowhere. You know, the person didn't ask you the truth. Also, the truth, whatever it is that you say, it should, you know, maybe it should be, it should have a function behind it. In other words, what is it you're trying to accomplish with it? Think about that. Your hair is ugly. Why did you say that to the person? I'm just telling the truth. I didn't care what. I didn't ask you what you're doing. I'm asking you why. Why is it? Because what oftentimes is left behind is not why we meant to do something, but that we did it. It's not. Okay. What we leave behind is what we did, not necessarily why we meant it. But sometimes why we meant it is important. You know, why would you just walk past a person and tell them that their hair is ugly? Because you're just being a mean son of a bitch, and you want to hurt that person as much as you're hurting. No, but I'm just telling the truth. Okay, we can say lots about you as well, but it should be something that's true. It should be something that's asked of you. It should edify. It should encourage. It should serve a function. It should build up. Yeah, there are certain things that that it should meet certain criteria. We shouldn't just blurt stuff out. Yeah.
And there's also like, is there a moral side to lying sometimes? Because Jesus told Peter or one of his disciples that you're going to deny him 3 times, but he's like, I won't do that. But when it came to, when someone saw him, he's like, you're a disciple of this guy, of Jesus. He's like, no. And they asked him 3 times and he still denied him. He's a lie. Is it moral to do that?
Yeah.
Is it moral side to lie?
Why did Peter lie? He was afraid of what? Death. Okay, so he lied because he was afraid of dying. That was the price he was going to pay, isn't it? And by the way, what was the price that Peter paid for that betrayal?
He felt guilty.
He felt terrible about it. He felt terrible about it. And by the way, what did he do with that guilt? I know we're getting deep in the weeds now. It's church day.
He went back to the family.
He repented. He turned away from it. Felt terrible about it. Recognized what had happened. He repented and turned away from it. How did Judas feel about his betrayal?
It was too much.
Felt terrible. What was that?
It was too much for him.
And what did he do?
He killed himself.
Killed himself. Yeah. 2 people who betrayed the same guy. One person felt terrible about it, turned away from it, and committed himself to living a better life. The other person, it was too much for him, and he hanged himself, and he's known as one of the great traitors of history. 2 ways that we can approach the terrible things that we do. You can either just figure, I'm a lowly piece of crap, I can't be redeemed, and I hate myself too much. You take yourself out of the picture. Don't do that. That doesn't solve anything except for stop you where you are. In other words, if you're, it's like when a person does something terrible, should we forgive them? Well, I guess it depends on what it is that we're hoping to get out of them for it. Do we want them to be a better person? If we want that person to be a better person, well then yes, we have to give them opportunities to be a better person. If we just want to punish the person, we can stop them where they are. And what that means is that they will never be better than where they are today. They will never get a chance to grow, and we're condemning them to never being better. And that's what Judas does when he kills himself. He condemns himself to never being able to redeem himself and be a better person. So those are the 2 options you have. You can, when you screw something up, maybe literally kill yourself. You shouldn't do that. Or maybe metaphorically kill yourself. I'm a terrible person. I'm not even going to try anymore. You shouldn't do that either. There's a clear path, which is you screwed up. Now live a life of repentance, turning away from the terrible thing that you did, whatever it was, and then being a better person. That's how you can redeem yourself. That's what redeems the world. One is a true expression of who you are. The other is a true expression of who you could be. And this is the thing about lying. Like, we'll go back to church. Why not? You guys know the story of, I mentioned earlier, Genesis, the creation. And so you've got these, the Garden of Eden.
God said not to eat. You can eat from all the fruit
To who?
except for to Adam and Eve.
Okay. So you got this. Okay. So you got God makes the world, makes the universe, and then He creates this place called the Garden of Eden, which is supposed to just be perfect. It has everything that people need, and it's an important lesson there. What's lacking in the garden? I said it's got everything a person needs, but what doesn't it have? So Adam is there. He creates the garden. He creates Adam. He creates all the animals. Adam names all the animals. And we're told that there's no sin and there's no death in the garden. And so what that means is that Adam can just chill. And he can chill out next to a grizzly bear. And the grizzly bear is not going to kill him. They can sit there and eat an apple, and you can offer the grizzly bear an apple. There's no death in the garden. Everything is perfect. It's everything that we need. I stress it, though. It's missing something. What's the one thing it's missing? As humans go, the one thing that we want. Because there's a difference oftentimes between what we need and what we want. Who is Adam's companion? It's the creator of the universe himself. He can just sit there and be like, hey, God, I wanted to ask you about something, And God will commune with him. God will talk to him. He gets to hang out with the creator of the universe. How many of us would, if you believed in God, would love to hang out with him? And this is part of the point, is that the story I'm telling you here, it doesn't have to be true. It doesn't have to be accurate, but it can still be true. Because in all of these doctrines, what we're looking for is what these things mean. We're looking for meaning in it. We want to be able to make sense of the world. A religious doctrine gives us an opportunity to make sense of the world. A scientific and political doctrine gives us an opportunity to make sense of the world and to make meaning of it. So the story that I'm saying here, the point of it is to always ask, what does that mean? What does that mean? Because it always means something. Everything means something. And so what does it mean that Adam can commune with God, and then God can commune with Adam, and yet he still isn't satisfied? Is that any of us in this room? Are any of us truly ever satisfied? Even when we're happy, even when we're joyous, even when we're eating a cheeseburger that we really like, couldn't the fries be a little bit better? Couldn't it not be so loud in here? Something. There's always something. And so he essentially says, all right, give me, can I have a helpmate? So what's the one thing Adam wants? A woman. He's going to replace God with another human. And so God's kind of like, all right, you want to help me? Yeah, please. Okay, I'll give you what you want. It's not what you need, but it's what you want. So here you go. And he gives him Eve. This goes back to, if you remember that story from the paintings of David with the head of Goliath. Remember the people of Israel, they wanted a king. And God was like, I'm your king. And they're like, yeah, that's cool and all, but we want like a human, like everybody else. We want to be like everybody else. In other words, they were created for something greater. And they rejected their greater calling and accepted to be just like everybody else. That means something. Some of you in here maybe have a magnificent calling, and yet will settle for being like everybody else because we just won't step forward on faith. It doesn't have to be a religious faith. Of course, the story is a religious story. Just because it's religious doesn't mean it has to be in your life. There's still a lesson there that you can step forward on faith and be greater than what you otherwise would have been if you just went back and resided and was like everybody else. But so many of us just settle for being like everybody else when you could be something greater. And so what ends up happening, of course, we know Israel pays for it. God gives them what they want, not what they need, what they want. Adam asks for a helpmate, and he's given the thing that he wants. And it's fascinating, because what's the very next scene? Eve is walking through the garden by herself. I thought you wanted a companion. I thought you wanted someone with you all the time. Why is she walking around by herself? And Adam's like, just hanging out with the boys. There are no boys yet, but he's practicing. Someday there will be boys. And so I guess he just needs a breather from Eve. He's like, I know you're going to give me that. We have no idea why, but we do know that she's walking around by herself. Well, there's a lesson that's there. Don't miss this. I'll come back to it. And so Eve encounters a serpent. And by the way, the serpent is walking around. He's got legs at this point. There's a meaning for that as well. And the serpent goes to her and starts talking to her. And again, she's by herself. What does that mean? It means that the serpents in your life are going to come to you when you're by yourself, when you feel most alone, when you're most vulnerable. And those serpents, by the way, remember, the Garden of Eden is perfect, right? No death, nothing. Somehow, the serpent got into the garden. It means something. That the serpents, no matter how well you try to protect yourself in life, the serpents will always get into the garden. No matter how perfect you think you created things, no matter how protective you've created things, the serpents will still get into your garden. At some point in your lives, you guys were all little babies. You were born, I imagine. Otherwise, this would be a really weird conversation. And your parents held you and probably said things like, I want better for you. I'm going to protect you. Nothing's ever going to harm you. Because you're just like, don't you worry, you'll always be protected. And at some point, I mean, imagine at that point I walked in there and tried to take you out of your parents' arms. I would probably have been beaten to death at that point. Why? Because no one's taking you away. You're being protected. But here's the thing, man. At some point, that protective garden that was placed around you was penetrated by the serpents. At some point, one of you guys, I don't know, maybe you guys were at home watching perfectly normal, wholesome cartoons or whatever, and in the next room, you heard your uncle or somebody talking about how somebody was murdered down the street. And maybe you heard that. And so later on you ask your mom or your dad, what does that mean, murder? What do you mean, murder? Where'd you hear that? Oh, I heard, like you're talking about in the next room, whatever. They were trying so hard to shelter you and protect you. But a serpent got into the garden, man. Some of you have been online and you've seen some videos. Any cartel beheading videos on your phone or things like this? Now, what if I said to you, well, your parents are going to put parental controls on your phone so you can't watch stuff like that? Some of you guys just scoff and are smiling. Why? Because you know they can't. They can do some things, but no matter how much protection they put around you, the serpent is still going to get into the garden. So maybe the thing that we can do best to protect people is not to keep them away from the serpents, or do the best we can to keep the serpents away, but also teach you how to deal with the serpents in your life when they do manifest. Because in this case here, the serpent manifests and goes to Eve and asks her a question. Hey, so God said you can eat of all these trees, huh? Is that what God said? No, God said you can eat of any tree in this garden except for this one tree that was sitting there. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so she says, no, God didn't say we can eat of any tree. He said we can eat of this, all the trees except for this one. What was that? There was a slight little manipulation, a slight little lie to put her in bondage. But she referred back to it and said, no, that's not what was said. No, that's not what was said. Oh, okay. And then of course the serpent, who we later find out is the devil, the serpent is like, okay, but he said, okay, so any tree except for that one. Yeah, but did he really say that though? Did he really say that? Do you believe that he said that? And she says, yeah, he said that. Heard it myself. Said it. Second manipulation tactic. To try to gaslight you into thinking that the person didn't say what they said. He's still trying to manipulate. Finally, manipulation isn't working. Withholding information isn't working. Confusing you isn't working. Well, here's the thing. Here's why God won't let you do that fruit. Because he knows that on the day that you do that, you're going to become a God just like him. And you're going to know good from evil. That's why he doesn't want you to eat it. He doesn't want you to become a God like him. Here's the fascinating thing. There's no lie in what he just said. All of that is true. On the day that you eat of that fruit, you will know good from evil. And that's a view that only, in the whole universe, God was the only one who had that knowledge, the knowledge of good and evil. So when she ate of that fruit, she became like God in that one little tiny, almost insignificant way. She knew good from evil. In the most self-destructive way, she knew that was true. Did she become, now what was probably going on in her mind? You mean I'll become powerful and be able to create universes? Let's find out. Try it. So the one thing that actually catches her up is the one thing that's not true. It's the one thing that is true, but it's still a manipulation. But what is it that makes it work? It's an appeal to pride. There's a lesson there. There's a meaning there. It's the one thing that appeals to pride that makes her go, I want to be greater than what I am. There you go. That's the thing that leads to the downfall. There's a meaning there. If Adam had just been, well, actually, I'll go back to it. So now, what does she do when she has that fruit and she has this knowledge of good and evil? She now looks around, she sees that she's naked, she freaks out. And what does she do very next?
Who's that?
Gives it to Adam. What's that?
She shares it.
Yeah, she shares it with Adam. My only friend in the whole world. Oh my God, I can't believe I've done this thing. I've ruined everything. Try this. And she takes her only friend in the whole world and drags him down with her. Well, there's a meaning there. That means something. There's a purpose there. It's not just, whether did Adam and Eve actually exist? I don't know. It's not the important thing. The important thing for most of us is just that there's a story there that's delivering a whole lot of truths. That if you understand it that way, most of us can recognize our own downfalls all along the way. And there's something about us as humans, we can sit there and go, oh my goodness, if they just hadn't screwed up, everything would be fine. Okay. You don't think, let's say everything was fine until today. You don't think you'd be that person who'd fuck everything up? I know I would be that person who'd fuck everything up. I think most of us would be. I don't think any of us could get through that. As simple as it is, but that's the thing, isn't it? How much of life is so simple, and yet we fuck it up by doing little tiny things, man. Doing little small things. In fact, some people will listen to what I'm saying right now, and they'll be on board with all of it, and they'll think it's interesting. And then they're going to clutch their pearls just now and go, he used the F word. Thrice. in 3 sentences, he used the F word thrice. Off. Maybe that's a screw up of my language. Maybe it's a screw up in my approach. The point is that at that point, they're cast out because you can never go back to what you were before. God, of course, at that point says, he finds out because Adam and Eve are now fully aware of good and evil. And part of what goes along with being aware of good and evil is being self-aware. We're the only creature, the only animal on earth that's self-aware. And what goes along with being self-aware? An awareness of our own mortality. Now they recognize, we're going to die. They weren't designed to die. They were designed to live forever. But because they corrupted themselves, that corruption is what kind of messes up that eternal life thing. It's almost like it corrupts your DNA. And now they're destined to die, like the rest of us. And so, as they realize this, and they're hiding. And so God's just walking through the garden. And he kind of goes, Adam, where'd you go? Does God know where Adam went? Of course he does. And then he's like, we're over here. They're hiding behind some bushes. And he's like, what are you doing? We're hiding. Why are you hiding from me? Well, because we're naked. How did you know you were naked? And what does Adam do? Who knows?
Lie.
No. He blames Eve. It was the woman you gave me. Oh, it was the thing you said you wanted. It was the person it was the exact, Build-A-Bear perfection of what you said you wanted in a helpmate. That's the thing that betrayed you. Yeah. So maybe the things also inside of you, and that you were so vulnerable to it. But, I don't know. Has anything changed? We're still blaming the other person for that. And so then God's just like, what have you done? He knew what they had done. And so he says, well, there has to be something that pays the price for this sin. So he kills some animals, makes animal skins out of them, so now they're wearing clothes. But now you understand that literal death has now also entered into the world. There's a meaning there. What is it that's going to happen if you live wrongly? If you lie, you deceive, you do what you're not supposed to do, if you drag down your friends around you? What is it? What's promised for you? What's death? Literal death is promised to all of us, but it's also a religious death. It's also a metaphysical death, psychological death. It's a lot of death. This is why I know so many old people who are dead, Just talking to them, you can see it. And there's a life that's just full of absolute regret and guilt because of things that people have done. And so I'm sure some of you are absolutely racked by the guilt of something that you've done in your life. And I know that some of you couldn't give less of a shit, even though you've done some horrible things in your life. Both of those are damaging because both of those stop us from becoming better, which is what we were talking about earlier. It's part of the goal of it all, to become better. Adam and Eve can't go back to what they were, but they can become better than what they presently are. Hopefully, if they choose that. I guess what I'm saying is that there's two paths that all of us can choose, life or death. Which one are you going to choose? Because remember, what is it that gives you life? Well, it's the truth. The truth is the very thing that sets you free. Lies are the thing that keep us in bondage and lead to death. Again, psychological death, moral death, mental death. And you thought it was just about two people running around in a garden somewhere, huh? And there's more to it than just that. That's kind of the gloss over of all of it. The point of it I'm saying is that we can only be certain of the things that we don't fully understand. Adam was absolutely convinced he wanted to help me. He didn't understand. He didn't know what he didn't know. And that's many of us. So maybe seek to know. Limit that window. Questions, comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms, critiques?